My name is Rochelle Ramirez, and I'm a program associate with CEC. So welcome to the Community Environmental Council's Environmental Hub. We're here today for the California Action on Climate, hosted by the League of Women Voters and CEC. So with every event, we have our land acknowledgement. So we stand on others' land which our predecessors took, stole, or otherwise obtained. The Chumash had cared for this land for many years, and we are only now becoming more aware of how to care for the land. We realize that we can learn from our Chumash neighbors for the benefit of our mutual future. So we thank them for continuing to work with us in the shared community. So this is tonight's agenda. I'm going to pass it on to Em to kind of like lead the way, but here you go.
Welcome everyone and good afternoon. I welcome you today to the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara and Community Environmental Council's Forum on California State Action on the Climate and its impacts here locally. So my name is Em Johnson. I'm the Director of Climate Resilience here at the Community Environmental Council, and I'll be your host this evening. So I'm going to introduce you now to our speakers and go through and explain the wonderful expertise we have here at the table. This event was really pulled together by Mr. Colin Jones. Colin Jones is a member of the League of Women Voters Santa Barbara and is a co-chair of their Environmental Action Committee. In the past, he actively supported the formation of our local community choice energy programs. He has a PhD in physics from the University of Illinois and a bachelor's degree from Carnegie Mellon University. He has worked in the areas of semiconductor materials and optical sensors. He came to Santa Barbara in 1981 and has worked for Hughes Aircraft's Santa Barbara Research Center, as well as Lockheed Martin Santa Barbara Focal Plane. Welcome, Colin. We're also welcoming Ben Schwartz this evening. Ben represents the Clean Coalition in proceedings of local California and federal government entities. Ben holds a BA in the History of Public Policy and Environmental Studies from UC Santa Barbara and has been with the Clean Coalition team since 2019. He uses his background to inform local, state, and national bodies about microgrids, net energy metering, community solar, and energy efficiency. Ben formerly worked with the World Business Academy and is passionate about helping humanity solve the three greatest crises that exist today: climate change, the lack of clean energy, and water scarcity. Welcome, Ben. And lastly, we're welcoming Mr. Jefferson Litton. Jefferson is the Energy and Climate Division Manager for the City of Santa Barbara. At the city, he manages the implementation of the city's soon-to-be adopted Climate Action Plan. The city's efforts adding solar, storage, and EV charging at their own facilities, and customer programs for the city's community choice energy provider, Santa Barbara Clean Energy. Prior to joining the city's team, Jefferson served as the Chief of Staff for Santa Barbara County Supervisor Joan Hartman. Among other topics, Jefferson covered energy and the environment for the office, helping Supervisor Hartman bring community choice energy to Santa Barbara County in 2020 and negotiate agreements to help the Strauss Wind Farm in Lompoc reach completion. Before the county, Jefferson served as the Director of Energy and Climate Programs here at the CEC. At CEC, Jefferson led local advocacy for community choice energy and led the organization's Solarize program, which has helped more than 500 homeowners go solar. And lastly, my name again is Em Johnson, and here at CEC, I run our climate resilience program as well as our clean energy programs related to buildings. I joined CEC in 2022, and I work on enacting CEC's programs that help our Central Coast communities better respond in the face of climate change-related disruptions. Before CEC, I was the executive director of Blue Sky Center, a regional local Economic Development Organization for investments in the Cuyama Valley. And before that, I completed my MBA in social entrepreneurship and strategic leadership. So welcome everyone today to what will surely be a very intriguing conversation. So I'm going to pass it to Colin to get us started. Thank you.
Hello. We're going to take a fast look at the global picture and then look at California and local issues and how they interact. The standard temperature, last year's global warming data just came in, and 2023 won the award as the hottest year on record and maybe the hottest year in the last 100,000 years. Global temperatures are still going up. We have not even slowed the rate of rise. We are now at 1.3 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial era. And we're getting very close to 1.5 degrees centigrade above that, which is what we were trying to hold. Okay. This is a figure from the International Monetary Fund. It's data for the last 45 years only, but it's the number of major natural disasters. This is worldwide data, largely floods and storms. The number of events in just this period has gone up 4 to 5 times. Global warming is already taking a toll. Okay, this figure shows the sources of greenhouse gases for California state. Transportation is 40%, industry 21%, electric power 15%, buildings 10%. California's cap and trade program is based on the industry and electric power portions of this graph. They would be 36% of California's greenhouse gases. California has taken global warming seriously, and we have ambitious goals to cut greenhouse gases. Jefferson Litton will cover the city of Santa Barbara's efforts to help meet these goals later in the forum. The 2020 goal was met easily. We were in pandemic. The next goal is only 6 years away, 2030, at 40% below 1990 levels. Next, 80% below by 2050. 26 years away. And carbon-free electricity and carbon neutrality by 2045 are our goals. California is following Europe and Quebec models, and they chose cap and trade as its main approach to cutting the state's greenhouse gases. Cap and trade covers about 450 companies, large emitting industries. These cause about 85% of California's greenhouse gases. These industries have to report their emissions to the California Air Resources Board. The board sets a cap on emissions that decrease year by year. Industries that do not meet their goals can buy credits from the industries that exceed their goals or from greenhouse gas reduction programs. The credits are sold 2 times a year in auctions. $13.3 billion so far has been raised by these sales. Anyway, the money goes to a wide range of projects, not just to the power industry. And so this is one of the important things about cap and trade, is the money raised goes to a whole range of other activities in climate change. Okay, how is California doing? There's a company called Next 10. It's an organization that has tracked California's greenhouse gas emissions for 15 years. Unfortunately, in the last years, they're showing a 3.4% rise in greenhouse gases. If we continue at that rate, we will miss our 2030 goals by 19 years. That'll move it to 2049. To meet the 2030 goal, our rate of lowering greenhouse gases would have to be increased by a factor of 3 times. from 1.5% per year to 4.4% a year. This is a massive increase in programs. The reasons for California's greenhouse gas rise have been two factors. The first is light vehicle emissions are up 10.6%. There's a possible reason why this is happening, and that is the California economy is rebounding. People are back to work. But at the same time, mass transit has not rebounded. The second reason is electric power emissions are up. And the possible reasons why is that with the economy up, they're being called upon to produce more power, and the power in the utilities is only about 1/3 clean. And the slow introduction of renewables in the power industry. Small but worrying is a large increase in non-CO2 greenhouse gases used as refrigerants. They've gone up something like 250% or something like that, a huge increase, but you're starting from a low level, but we've gone up very high in the refrigerants. There are three main issues I'd like to look at holding California back in its climate change actions. The first problem is California has a budget deficit. The reason for the budget deficit is that the high interest rates of the last couple of years have slowed the economy for some, and the tax increase income coming in from the last year has been at budget levels. The Democrats in the legislature and Governor Newsom have agreed on a budget to be released later in May. The good news is about 90% of the climate funding was saved at about $48 billion. But this means that climate funding was cut, $2.9 billion, and $1.9 billion was delayed. We may not have current funding to expand greenhouse gas reduction efforts, even in a time when we're losing. A rate was lowered for power sent to the grid is the second reason. From solar and batteries that want to submit energy back to the grid and get some recompense for the expense of having the solar and batteries. The rules for this are called net energy metering. NEM 2 changed to NEM 3 is what you may have heard. The rebates were lowered 80% and the rate of new California solar dropped about 70%. Local job loss in the solar installation industry in the first months of this year were 17,000 and they're growing. Nevada tried this in the 1990s, saw the same results. 2 years later, they replaced the original rebates, and solar installations went back up. NEM 3, net energy metering issues. We need more clean energy, but NEM 3 drastically lowered the new clean California rooftop solar installations. Solar alone is a problem. It gives a glut of energy to the grid in the afternoon and provides no power help in the evenings when the demand is high. Utilities have increased the rebates for power supplied to the grid in the evenings. This should increase the sale of solar plus a battery, where the battery is charged during the afternoon by the solar and then in the evening feed back into the grid when the need is high. Okay, the third problem area is distributed energy resources, called DERs, could help. DERs, if you're not sure what a DER, you think solar and battery, or solar, Local microgrids, renters, solar, bidirectional EV connections, a meter in front of group meters for a school or government facilities. DERs could be very important in greenhouse control, in local resilience from power outages, and in lowering electric power costs. However, the California Public Utility Commission last fall voted to confirm their opposition to front-of-meter systems important for some of these systems of DERs, especially those increasing local resiliency. A break came in March 21st when California regulators from the CPUC approved the limited generation profile options to connect DERs to the grid. The DERs have to follow specific schedules and limits as to how much energy they can send to the grid and when. Also, the sites allowed are based on a map which designates the high areas in need. There is a DER battle going on in the legislature. There are bills that are wanting to replace the NEM 3 lowered rebates. The first bill up there is passed committee, but it was amended to being a very weak bill. There are bills to allow a meter in front of group meters, and that's your renters solar or for schools. The status is that was killed. There's a bill for repealing NEM 3, status watered down to a non-effective bill. There's a bill that allowed electricity produced on site to pass through the grid at no cost and back to other sites on the same property. Status is pending for that still. And another bill requires the CPUC to find the full value of local solar in setting their rates. That's again trying to force the rates for putting solar energy back into the grid. This again was watered down by amendment. So it's been a very frustrating year for legislative action on climate change. And I'll now turn the meeting over to Ben Swartz, who will talk a little bit more about DERs, the distributed energy resources.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Schwartz. I am the policy manager for the Clean Coalition, and I'll be talking about distributed energy resources, DERs. I'll try not to keep it too jargony, but that tends to be how the industry is. And the Goleta Load Pocket, which is what we call the Santa Barbara region, and I'll go more into that later on and why resilience is so key for the region. In particular, when we describe DERs, we talk about them in microgrids, especially as having an unparalleled trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. So I will go into all three of those, but this portion of the presentation is going to focus on those first two, the economic and the environmental aspects. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. We do that with technical, policy, and project expertise. And the reason for that is there's nothing to show you that the system is broken, like the inability to deploy a project, or the brain damage that it takes to actually get something built and operational. And so really what a lot of this comes down to is the future of the grid and how the grid has operated in the past and what we expect and believe that it should be in the future, and why that's necessary to achieve California's goals. So the Clean Coalition has a 25% goal. That is 25% of all of our energy should ideally come from local resources or DERs. And that's going to be a significant increase compared to where we are now. But we also are in the midst of a significant transition. And it's also worth noting that 25% local energy means local benefits, but it also means that 75% of that energy mix is still going to need to come from the existing transmission grid or remote resources. So as I mentioned, the grid is in the midst of a significant transition, and that's because we are currently living in a world where the grid was built and still operates on 20th century principles. So you start from remote power, like a utility scale solar farm in the middle of the desert. Then that energy is sent over hundreds of miles of transmission lines before it goes to a substation, and it goes at a lower voltage to the distribution grid, where all of us are, and that's where our load centers are. And the problem with this is that it's built on a fundamental principle that the most effective way to deliver energy is from remote to local. Now, there are a couple problems with that. One of the main ones is that when we're building local projects, it gets to where it needs to be effectively. It's an efficient way to develop power. If we're talking about remote power plants, that doesn't just mean the cost of building that power plant, it also means the cost of building the infrastructure associated with transmitting that energy. And as I'll show later, it's the transmission grid that is one of the leading causes, I should say, of rising electricity rates. So just the other points here, that a larger grid is more difficult to maintain, and that's especially true in California due to risks of wildfires and earthquakes, and local residents don't benefit from things that are being built in the middle of the desert, for example. Now, this really gets at the biggest problem that California has today. And it's the biggest kind of stranglehold over the legislature, over the regulatory side of things, which is just the significant pace at which rates are increasing. This is kind of a complicated graph. What you really need to take a look at are the dotted lines, which represent the pace of inflation. So that's what things should be increasing at. And then the solid lines are what they've actually increased at. And so this is for Southern California Edison, but the result is for the ratepayers that there are double-digit rate increases that are coming this year and certainly over the next couple of years. Over the last decade, each of the utilities has had far greater than a 50% rate increase. For Southern California Edison, that's 91%. For PG&E, it's over 100%, 127%, and San Diego Gas and Electric is 72%. And the key is that it's not stopping anytime soon. Likely, each of the utilities will have 30% increases over the next couple of years. And so when we talk about the government between the deficit and huge rate increases, the only thing that our government is thinking about is how to make those costs go down. And unfortunately, they've scapegoated DERs and local energy as one of the main causes for those rising rates and not out of control spending. All right, so these are some of the different types of DERs. We talked about affordability. The second part of the equation is, what is the broader grid doing? So the image on the right shows what the demand looks like over the course of a day. And actually, this is September 6th, 2022, which was the all-time day of highest demand. And so the line in red shows that we have kind of medium demand to start. Then during the beginning of the day, the demand goes down, particularly as solar starts to kick in. More solar means less usage of the grid. And then over time, that demand goes up. And the highest point of demand is around 5 p.m., which kind of makes sense. That's when everyone's coming home. They're starting to charge their cars, get ready for dinner, things like that. And so what we really need is not only solar that can reduce the total demand, but we need local resources to help reduce that peak, to help lessen the congestion, the overall demand on the grid, and in particular, the transmission grid. So when the system operator considers the grid, they are managing the broader transmission grid. They're managing for all three of the utilities. And so lessening stress on the transmission grid means we need to build out less additional infrastructure, and therefore we need less additional transmission, and lowers rates overall over time. And so What the benefit of these distributed energy resources is that they allow resources that are deployed locally to provide an economic stimulus to the people who own them, that is the individuals, and then of course there is also reduced grid usage, and reduced grid usage makes the system more optimal for everyone else. And so I just want to point out that there are a variety of different DERs. And really this can mean anything that's connected to the distribution grid or has some sort of impact on the local grid. So this could be solar or battery energy storage. It could also be the way that we use electric vehicles. They can operate as mobile batteries that charge in one place and then, for example, power a house or help power the grid in another place. And that's the type of technology that's coming online and in some cases is online. And then I'd just like to point out microgrids as well. Microgrids are some sort of renewable generation, usually, some sort of battery storage and controls. And so when the broader grid shuts down, when there's a grid outage, the microgrid is capable of continuing to stay energized and powering any on-site loads. And so that's really critical given California's history with outages. Okay, so I started to mention some of these, but there are a variety of benefits from DERs. But the main point is that as the ratepayers, we're footing the bills for very ambitious political goals. And the Clean Coalition, we 100% agree with those goals, but from an individualistic standpoint, if we're paying for something, we deserve to share in the benefits from it as well, and we also deserve a grid that is designed in the most cost-effective and optimal way. So just to go through a few of these, certainly there's economic savings, there is reduced air pollution, there is resilience, which I'll cover later. Deploying resources locally is also far more cost-effective and time-efficient than it is to deploy something in the middle of the desert where you have to worry about potentially disturbing an endangered species, versus if you're doing it here, you're just building on an existing foundation. So there's far less environmental impacts to worry about. And then of course, the fact that it's more efficient, having energy close to where you need it means you need to use less of the grid. And that means less energy upgrading the grid. It also means the grid is more useful and available for everyone else when it's needed. Okay, and actually I will stop there for now and turn it over to Jefferson. My second.
My name is Jefferson Litton. I am the Energy and Climate Division Manager at the City of Santa Barbara. It is a pleasure to be back here before the League of Women Voters. 10 years ago, Colin and I, we organized a forum with the League across the street at Lois Lowry Davis Center, advocating for community choice energy. And now 10 years later, community choice energy created my job. So thanks, Colin, and thanks to the League. How many people know what community choice energy is, just out of curiosity? All right, so it looks like we have a very educated crowd on that, so I won't even go into that. So today, I'm going to cover, at a high level, the City of Santa Barbara's climate goals. So then I'm going to talk about our climate goals as they are in our Climate Action Plan. So we are currently working on our latest version of the Climate Action Plan, which will be before our City Council on July 2nd, and that's going to map out how we are going to achieve our ambitious goals, which I'll talk about. And then I'm going to talk about a couple city resilience projects in general, and then I'm going to talk about resilience in the community. And as I talk about resilience today, it's going to be kind of a limited definition of resilience. I'm going to talk about resilience as it relates to our buildings and how our buildings can function in the time of grid shutdown and operate on their own. Em over here does a lot of work around resilience and resilience hubs and standing up centers in the community that can offer resources, information, and programming to help the community before, during, and after disasters. But I'm going to talk really more specifically about buildings today. So the city has two very ambitious climate goals. One is to achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We are already about halfway there, and we are already providing all of Santa Barbara homes and businesses with 100% carbon-free electricity. So our electricity is made up of wind, solar, and hydropower. But by 2030, we want to eliminate that hydropower and be completely renewable. The other very ambitious goal that the city of Santa Barbara has is carbon neutrality by 2035, effectively meaning that we want to reduce our GHG emissions to 0. So this is 10 years more quickly than the state wants to achieve this goal. So it's going to take a lot of work, and it's not going to be easy, but this is what carbon neutrality looks like pictorially. I don't think pictorially is a word, but what it means is dramatic waste reduction. It means shifting people to active transportation. It means clean public transportation. It means all electric buildings that are powered by solar with batteries on site. And it means increasing the amount of trees and compost that spreads so that we can sequester more carbon from the air. So all of these goals have been captured in this document that you see here, Together to Zero. So Together to Zero includes 28 measures and 194 specific climate actions that will help us progress towards reaching carbon neutrality by 2035. As these goals relate to resilience, what we want to do is we want to implement all feasible microgrids at city facilities. And we want to devote the planning and the funding and the resources necessary so that we can electrify all of our buildings at city facilities and add solar and storage to those facilities. Now I'm going to talk about a couple projects in specific. So this is the Granada Garage here, not too far from where we're standing today, just across the street. The Granada Garage is the city's most recently built parking garage. It was built in 2006. Beyond just the parking garage, it contains 12 affordable housing units, city police offices, library police offices, downtown parking police offices, and it also contains a bike locker. And this is it in 2006, and this is the Granada Garage today. So we're really proud of this one. Yeah, feel free to clap. So this is the Granada Garage. It has 426 kilowatts of solar on its roof, a battery system on the basement, so that this is effectively a microgrid. That if the grid goes down, this building can completely power itself, power all of the residences there, all the offices, and function on its own based on the solar that's generated on site. Yeah. So one really cool thing about this project is we got a grant through what's called the SGIP program, Self-Generation Incentive Program, from the state, which covered 100% of the cost of the batteries. What was the cost? 3.2, so it was pretty significant. Actually, I'm mixing that up. That was a previous. The next slide was 3.2, so it was a little bit less for these batteries. And then we entered into a power purchase agreement for the solar. So basically, we have a fully functioning microgrid for the price of a relatively cheap power purchase agreement for solar. So we do not own this system. We just purchase the electricity that it generates, but we purchase it at a rate which is about half of the rate if we were just purchasing it from the grid. So this is really nice. We just have to finish restriping the paint, and then we'll get the inspection, and we can officially flip the switch on that, and that'll be running hopefully in a month or so. There's storage. Yep, there's a Tesla battery array in the basement for that facility. This is another project that we recently completed up at our Cater water treatment facility. So basically all of our drinking water in the city of Santa Barbara, as well as the water for Carpinteria and Montecito, gets treated at Cater. The batteries are these buildings that you see in white here. This is Tesla battery system. Again, we applied for the same incentive for these batteries. So this project basically cost us nothing. Yeah. And so this project is going to back up the pump station so that no matter what, we will be able to move water off of that facility out into the city. This project does not have solar tied to it yet. Excellent question. But we are scoping that project right now to add solar and then add an additional battery array as well. So this serves two functions. It's the resilience function, and then also we can use these batteries to store electricity. As Ben pointed out, electricity in the middle of the day where it's really not very valuable, and then use that electricity in the evening from 4 to 9 where it becomes a lot more expensive. And so simply by doing that, we're going to save about $800,000 over the life of the system, just moving how we're using our electricity and storing it. The next project up is our police station, which is going to go where the Saturday Farmers Market is right now. I think you probably read about that in the news this week. So this project, we are striving for a zero net energy building. So we are trying to generate as much electricity on site as the building consumes. I think we're going to kind of have to stretch that measure to meet our charging load. It's a debate that we're having with the police station right now about how much charging we're going to put into that site. But some really advanced technologies in there, advanced green building systems in that building, and it should be a showcase for the community to enjoy. Now, moving on to the community, resilience in the community, Santa Barbara Clean Energy, we offer programs and partnerships to help homes and businesses come along in this journey towards carbon neutrality. And I featured here just a couple things that homeowners can do through our partners. One is the Simplify battery. A company called Simplify out of Ojai has agreed to offer discounts to any Santa Barbara Clean Energy customer that wants to add batteries. Brighton Solar, another local solar company, offers discounts for solar as well as batteries. And then Home Power, or Powered Up Santa Barbara, is a company that offers basically a turnkey solar and storage system through a power purchase agreement. So you're basically agreeing to purchase the electricity for a certain rate, and you will get solar and storage at zero upfront cost. So these are just a couple ways in which you as homeowners can participate in this journey towards carbon neutrality. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on community resilience, which kind of is a good transition from what Jefferson talked about. First, I wanted to go back and address one of the biggest problems with the existing regulation. Colin described this program net energy metering, or NEM, and it's what, if we're putting batteries or solar on our rooftops, that's the compensation program that everybody uses. But the biggest problem with it can be illustrated in this image here, which shows the site Direct Relief, and it's their headquarters in Goleta. So obviously a preeminent nonprofit from Santa Barbara, and they decided to deploy a microgrid. So you can see kind of the dark area on the rooftop, that's the actual solar that they deployed. Everything else, all the highlighted area in the parking lots and the rest of the roof, really the remaining 70% of the roof, they were unable to use that at all. So that space is essentially going to waste. And the reason for that is because of this program, net metering. What net metering says is you can deploy as much solar on your roof as you are going to have consumption. So if you're going to use 100 kilowatt hours, for example, then you can put 100 kilowatts worth of solar and storage on site, but you can't use more of that. And so when it comes to community resilience, a site like this, or a warehouse, or perhaps a church that wants to benefit the local grid, that wants to help provide extra energy, for example, when the grid goes down, they cannot do that in an economical way because the program rules are designed for economic compensation and not for resilience. So this is one of the main policies that the Clean Coalition is working on, is trying to get a program in place where you can deliver as much energy to the grid as you have space for on site to maximize the use of space here rather than, promoting solar in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so this really kind of gets into the nitty-gritty politics of it all, but for the utilities, they make money on infrastructure. So the more infrastructure they build, the better. And they see rooftop solar as somewhat of a threat to that and a threat to their business model. And so kind of at the highest level, they are very concerned that paying people more for local solar than they're paying people for solar out in the middle of nowhere is a bad deal. And they argue that not enough low-income folks are putting solar on their roof, Now, in response to that, I would say that low-income folks are, and it doesn't help if you cut prices by 80%. That certainly doesn't increase the incentive for anyone, and certainly doesn't do that for a site that has a lot of space like Direct Relief. So just wanted to bring that up. That's certainly a concern to the concept of community resilience. Just for everyone, if we kind of put a spectrum here, if net metering or rooftop solar is on the small side, and on the large side you have the remote generation in the middle of the desert, then the space that's in the middle, where your large warehouses want to put solar, or where you want to, for example, put battery that can serve the entire neighborhood, that's kind of this middle section here where the policies are missing in California, and that's really a market that is essential for community scale resilience. Okay, so this is a map of the region, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we call this the Goleta Load Pocket, which is named for the Goleta substation. You can see that kind of right in the middle by UCSB. This is a region that spans 70 miles of the coast, from Point Conception all the way to Lake Casitas, and it's particularly grid vulnerable. So this is served by one single set of transmission lines. It's 2 transmission lines on the same tower, and they run across the mountains, which is earthquake vulnerable. It's a high fire threat district, and we have learned from dealing with Southern California Edison that if either of the lines goes down, they'll both go down. And if they go down for whatever reason, the region, the GLP, will be without power for an extended amount of time, the very least a few days, more likely a number of weeks. And so that's pretty concerning, and it means that we should be planning for that possibility, however seldom or however rare the occurrence might be. So the Clean Coalition has done a forecast for the area and determined ideal targets for the amount of solar and energy storage that we would need to create community scale resilience, or deploy what's called a community microgrid. And those numbers are 200 megawatts of solar and 400 megawatt hours of energy storage to provide 100% resilience, and really to the most critical loads in the region. And so in particular, the solar is difficult, especially if we're only doing small chunks on rooftops here and there. The battery storage is far more manageable, and I'll discuss a number of projects that we've worked on that are really getting us close to those goals. But the key here is that when the transmission grid is vulnerable, and we have the utilities talking about fossil fuels and diesel, for example, as backup power, clearly there needs to be a more long-term solution, and one that makes sense for the people who are living here. So this is kind of an example of the grid of the future, and really what it represents is a community microgrid, which is a system with renewable energy that is optimized to use that energy in the most effective way. And in the event that the grid goes down, the entire area will stay on and stay energized and remain powered. And if a community microgrid is the larger piece, then solar microgrids are individual building blocks. And these provide individual facilities with resilience and fit in well with the concept of a larger community microgrid. So this image kind of shows it very well, that as we're moving into the future and the state is asking us to switch from fossil fuels, to switch from gas to only using electricity or electrification, then the number of appliances we have that are going to be smart appliances capable of communicating with other things in the home or the outside world will increase. And the number of opportunities to use those devices for the benefit of the grid or for resilience will increase as well. So our grid will become increasingly bidirectional. In other words, the flow of electricity is going from the grid to the house, and in many cases from the house or from the facility to the grid. And that gives us a number of options if we use them in a smart fashion. So in terms of commercializing microgrids, we need the pathways, and that's where a lot of our work comes in demonstrating those projects and getting the policies and market mechanisms to change. We also need as a society to consider resilience not only from an electrical perspective, but also from a community perspective. So each community understands its own needs. They understand, what building, what facility is critical, what provides services that are necessary to keep everything afloat, especially when the grid goes down. And so these are a list of critical facilities where it's important to have power. And of particular note are schools, government buildings, rural areas, although there aren't so many in South Santa Barbara County, and then areas where there is limited grid availability as well. Using smart local resources and operating them effectively can help mitigate the need for costly grid upgrades. Okay, so the first example is one that the Clean Coalition worked on. We worked with Santa Barbara Unified School District to determine their energy needs and their resilience needs. We selected 14 sites to move forward, and we really started this process in 2020 and kind of finished it closer to the end of 2021. We decided on 6 sites with solar microgrids, which means that they have the capability to keep the lights on even when the broader grid goes down. 8 sites for solar only, and that creates an opportunity over time. If they want more, they can deploy energy storage or a battery. But what this demonstrated is that for a school district where there isn't necessarily a lot of extra funding available, that it's possible to make the economics work, and not only to save close to $8 million in energy savings alone, but also to get this additional value of resilience essentially for free. So that's another couple of $1 million there alone. But in total, this makes our community safer, and it also helps benefit the school district itself, freeing up more money that can be used for other things. Now this is kind of another view. These are the sites where the solar microgrids went into place. Notice we've got all of the high schools. They've got the biggest number of students there, and also serve as community centers, as well as the district food warehouse and office site as well. Okay, so the next portion of this is hitting those battery targets to achieve the necessary amount of solar and storage in particular here for a community microgrid. And so the Clean Coalition has worked, and we continue to work wherever there are opportunities for local battery projects to facilitate them by building a coalition of supportive organizations. The CEC has often been on that list, definitely. So one of them was in Carpinteria. It's called the Vallecito Energy Storage Resilience Project, or VESSER, and this is a 40 megawatt hour project located relatively close to Carpinteria High School. And if you notice, 40 megawatt hours, that's already 1/10 of the total amount of energy storage needed to hit that goal. So if we keep going with a few more like that, we'll be there in no time. And the other reason for having energy storage is that there is currently a gas-fired peaker plant, is what it's called, located in Goleta. It's the Elwood plant, and it was recently extended by the governor over the last couple of years to say that it must continue to run to ensure that the grid is safe and functional. But as we've seen, we have opportunities for energy storage and renewable resources, and as a community, we should be trying to do everything possible to stop using that gas peaker plant as soon as we possibly can. And so that area right near the Elwood plant is a perfect site for another battery project. The grid is already primed there for the peaker plants, and if we have enough energy storage to just turn the peaker plant off and turn the storage on in the same place or in the same area, it's a perfect match, essentially. So certainly we need to hit that hour, that 50 megawatt hours that the peaker plant currently serves, but it is doable, and we can get there certainly sooner than expected with a strong coalition. And then last is, in terms of the sites, is SB Humane. Now, a humane society is not typically considered a critical facility under government definitions. in our view, I think that just shows that the definition needs to be expanded and that each local area has its own views. But certainly, we think that this is a critical facility and serves a very important function in the community. So we are working with SB Humane. We've done a preliminary solar siting survey, which is what this is, and an economic analysis to determine that moving forward with a microgrid is feasible, and are currently in the process of conducting an RFP to solicit a developer that can actually help us build out the project. And then just to finish off here, at the beginning, Colin mentioned it's been a particularly tough time in the legislature. And that's true. That's something that we've experienced as well. The Clean Coalition had a bill on this subject, which is called master metering, that was kind of defeated at the last minute due to some political struggles. But the subject itself is quite important, which is just that if you are a single family home, you can put solar and storage on your roof, and you can get it deployed in less than 6 months. We've got a very good system in place for that. But if you're an apartment, you can't do the same thing. We got data from the utilities, from PG&E and SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric and Pacific Gas and Electric, saying that they have 23,000 projects where there is solar on an apartment building. And so we asked, well, how many can provide backup power? And the answer was that only 2 have battery storage, which is needed, and neither of those can provide any sort of resilience. So it doesn't matter where you are in the state, and I should just add, SCE got the request a month ago and is still responding to us, so we don't have their information yet. We will, though. But the point is that it doesn't matter, if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if it's a condo or it's affordable housing. There are not opportunities to benefit from the resilience. And so we think that this is something that needs to change, and it's going to have to go through the legislature, and certainly will need quite a bit of support. But I think it's just a good indication of how kind of inequitable our policies can be. That we say we want these things for low-income folks. We say we want opportunities. We say we want folks to be able to benefit economically. And then when it comes down to it, when we're actually working on the projects, we learned that the existing rules and regulations are far more constraining than we would like them to be. And certainly if we want to get towards a place where we can actually meet the state goals. So I will just leave it here, and this is kind of what we're working on with the Goleta Load Pocket. I'll hand it back to Em.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. So I think each one of you might have a different answer to this question. So maybe I'm going to state the question, and you all just let me know how you're feeling. So the first one is, what effect will the increased density from anticipated housing developments have on some of these stated climate resilience goals?
I think the city is prepared to accommodate any increases in density and any increases of housing in terms of our climate goals. The primary reason for that, there's 2 primary reasons for that. One is we have already defaulted our electricity to 100% carbon free. So they're already going to be clean homes. And then if it's new construction, it's going to have to meet very aggressive codes, building codes, so that it's going to have on-site generation. It's going to have to be more electrified than current buildings. So I think the state, in some respects, in a lot of respects, has helped us out there with the building code, so that new construction they're really going to be high-performing buildings. And with a clean energy mix, we're a long way there.
So on a state level, the government is suggesting that total demand for electricity is going to increase by around 67% at least. And that certainly kind of generally accounts for our housing targets. I would say that, the most important part of that is just making sure that, our local governments are working with the utilities and CCAs and are planning for energy needs as demand and as new housing is built. And so, assuming that we're having those conversations, I think Jefferson's right that it's definitely very feasible. I think part of the important thing is making sure that new buildings that we can use them in the most effective way, and that we can use them to the fullest, and not that, they're building some small amount of solar and then the rest of the roof is going unused, or, there's space for a battery, but they're deciding not to use it. So really just making sure that new constructions are utilizing the full range of options that are available.
The comment I've got is that my feeling is that we're groping with a transition period where the state laws, the California Public Utility Commission laws on group solar where you've got 1 meter that is on top of all the other meters going to the individual apartments or offices or whatever is in a building, that you can have that double layer of control, and right now we can't. And so the thing that's going through my mind is that we're grasping with things that we haven't come to good solutions yet, and we're still working on these things in the state and local interest level. And so my hope is that we can get through this fairly quickly.
Thank you. And turning over to a prompt question for this group here, how do groups of community members best apply political pressure when it comes to talking about enabling these distributed energy resources and the variety of those throughout the state?
So I can take that quickly. The Clean Coalition often describes what we do as stakeholder engagement, and we're not building projects, we're facilitating projects. Getting the parties to the table is probably the most important aspect of the development process, and we've seen just as many projects that have been defeated because of vigorous opposition as we have projects succeed because there is a coalition there behind it. So really reaching out to politicians, commenting at meetings, having community events like this are essential. And I would say that our individual voices are more important than we think, particularly when it comes to local issues, especially in comparison, to big state or federal policies. What we're doing here at home makes all the difference.
I think Ben pretty much covered it. I think for DERs, it's really a fight at the state level, whether it's at the Public Utilities Commission or at the legislature. I think in terms of climate action plans, that's at the local level, and certainly come out and support those. I applaud the communities on the Central Coast, really, for advocating for community choice energy and getting us there. That was a huge step for us, and I'm very thankful for the local support that we have.
There are a number of groups that are climate groups. There's a California Association of Community Action and Community Solar. So there's a number of groups out there that are very active in talking to the government or getting their people to send letters or telephone calls and things like that. And so the one thing is look out for some of these groups, see if you like them, and get active with these groups.
Yeah, I'll echo that and say that there's a lot of groups here that are providing really essential educational resources to retell the narrative about what the effects of energy are on our communities and exactly what type of savings we have when we integrate these solutions. That's one of the biggest stories that are really miscommunicated right now, is the cost of these types of solutions. So thank you all so much for really elevating that and telling the real story. And unfortunately, we're out of time, but I do want to take a moment and thank some really important people who made this happen. First and foremost, thank you to these expert speakers who have provided essential information today. Thank you especially to Colin, who really pulled this together and pulled together these amazing speakers. Thank you to Santa Barbara TV, who have provided these resources and are recording the event and are providing an essential service in our community. And thank you, lastly, to Senator Monique Lamone's office and her Chief of Staff, Jordy Scully, for all of their support in our region. And thank you to the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara. Please join their cause. Get out and vote. Thank you.